Hello and welcome back to the second episode of the Amara podcast. I'm Miriam.
I'm Lexi.
And today our episode is going to be about the link between madness and creativity, the science behind it, the psychology of creativity, and art as a form of therapy. So, first question. Is stress good for creativity and performance? What do you think, Lexi?
I think in terms of a psychological perspective, stress has to be good in terms of performance, or else nobody would have it. I think performance is something that psychologically, the idea of being judged by others has always been something that we feel stressed about. But I think that stress is viewed as a negative thing, whereas I think that there's different forms of stress that are very positive and some are negative. And I think obviously performance anxiety can become very negative, but I think certain performance anxieties are almost adrenaline fueling. So it's somewhat, it makes you feel alive. So I'm guessing in terms of performance, I think stress can be a good thing. I'm not sure in creativity. Do you think that being stressed makes you more creative or less creative?
I think it's the type of stress you're under. So, for example, if you're stressed about a deadline, for example, I think that's neither good or bad because it's like you want to get it done. That's your main focus. Whereas if it's stress about whether it's good or bad, I feel like that only makes you produce better work because it's sort of motivational.
But then I suppose for me personally, I think stress about a deadline would make me less creative, because if it came down to a deadline, it would mean that I would have all of these ideas for things that I wanted to do. But if I was keeping the deadline too much in mind, I would purposefully hold back in order to be able to get it done. Whereas I feel like if I was stressed about whether it was good or bad, it would drive me to make it as good as it possibly could be because I knew it was going to be judged. I think there's something to say about some people make their best work when they don't think anyone is going to see it, but some people make their best work when they think people are. Which one do you think you are?
I think my best work is when I know when I know that people either aren't going to see it or that they're not going to see it at first, which gives time for development. So, for example, with a first draft, I'm very particular about it because a first draft for me is more like a third draft.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I'm very details. So when usually I give someone a first draft, they're like, give me a first draft of your script. I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, it's pretty much like a fourth draft, honestly. So I'm not too bothered about that. But when it's I know I'm on a time crunch and I started late and I'm not really passionate about what I'm doing, then that kind of stress for me is I'm not going to be creative because I'm just not passionate about what I'm doing.
So you're saying, from a psychological perspective, passion is what makes creativity?
Yeah, I think it has a hand in it. But I also think that madness and who we are based on past experience affects how we think in the present and how creative we are. Because, say, for example, a really bad upbringing, that can also influence the way, for example, a songwriter writes their lyrics, what they write about. I think it brings emotional depth into what they write. Yeah. And I feel like having a perfect life, there's no shade to people who have really good childhoods, by the way.
How dare you have a good... Oh, your parents love you? That's great. You're never going to amount to anything, are you? Garbage.
Again, no shade whatsoever.
Oh, I really like this first draft as a script. Oh, thanks. My mum helped me. Oh, she did. Yeah, my parents are just so supportive. You know what? Now that I look at it again, I found some discrepancies.
How ominous.
I reckon that's what they do. Instead of a job interview, it's just, How damaged are you?
Very. Great, you're hired. To be fair, though, we make fun of it, but there is some truth in that. Because I feel like a lot of past songwriters, singers, artists who were sort of mad or had an emotional illness or a really bad upbringing or had an addiction of some sort, their writing slash work tends to be better in the way which we as an audience like to perceive it through an emotional standpoint because it's more real. Whereas if you're an artist who's singing about a breakup but have never truly experienced it, it's not the same thing. Like,
See, I don't know. In my opinion, this kind of links back to the last episode. If you haven't watched it, feel free to go and watch the previous episode. What makes a serial killer on Amara, the YouTube channel? While you're here, also click subscribe. But in the last episode, we talked about what makes a serial killer, and we said that it's a mix of genes and environment that sort of act as a cocktail almost, or like some sort of like mix that makes people go down that path. And I think it's the same thing. I think the people who are the most creative are the people with heightened senses of empathy. And so, in my opinion, if you have a terrible childhood and you have so many emotions and so much empathy and you absorb all of these emotions, you are likely to make more emotional art that more people can relate to. But I don't think a bad childhood or madness is necessary. I think that a lot of the time people, and especially women, are judged for the emotion that they bring to their art forms. Like, take Taylor Swift, for example. It was such a trend to make fun of her for, like, singing about her breakups and, like, you know, just writing songs about her ex-boyfriends. But really, it wasn't about them, it was about the emotion. But because she didn't have some sort of madness or traumatic childhood that we knew of, everyone took that empathy and invalidated it.
yeah, going back to the artisan form of therapy, I feel like it was more of a her trying to get her feelings out more than a her trying to please her fan base.
Oh, 100%. It was the same with Adele, but on a very different level. I think her songs were also in the in the same vein, but I think a lot of her stuff tended to revolve around more about real life.
Yeah.
Like, I think everyone seemed to think that her emotions were a lot more real. And this is not to pit these artists against each other. They're both extremely talented. But I think the idea is that you needed to have that certain... It wasn't necessarily madness. I think it was emotion. And I think logic... Here's a question. Miriam, as a very logical person,
Yeah.
do you think your logic improves or hinders your creativity?
Well, I approach things in a very organized, logical sort of to-do list manner. So I feel to some degree, I guess so, because there is some sort of art form and chaos. Whereas if everything you do is organised, I mean, there is a beauty in it, I suppose, but I think you can get stuck in a habit. And I guess in some part, having everything to be so neat and so organised and focusing on everything from a very logical standpoint, it does kind of hinder your creativity to an extent, but at the same time, I feel like it also enables creativity because sometimes being organised, I mean, a lot of the time being organised is a good thing, but I think for me personally, if I know something is going right and that it's following a schedule, it helps me think better because I'm not worrying about it.
So you're saying that what we were talking about earlier, the idea of does stress hinder, you would say stress does hinder your creativity, but because you keep everything organized, it allows you to be more creative.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily the organization that's making your creativity worse. It's when said organization doesn't go to plan.
Correct.
So would you say that you think that being organized in itself, how would you say that affects the creativity in terms of like when it does go to plan? Would you say that still makes it worse, or does it make it better?
So being organized for me means that my creativity is scheduled, which I know sounds bad, but like I think I really like having a routine. And I like, because when I'm not stressed about, say, for example, time, or when I'm not stressed about, I don't know, the judgment of others, it enables me to have to start from a blank canvas, because it's not hindered my approach to whatever I'm doing.
So if your mind is clean, you can build upon that and make it creative. Whereas if your mind is cluttered, you feel like you can't channel it. See, that's so strange, because I'm almost the exact opposite. I would say I'm creative in the sense of I am a relatively organized person, but I would say I have moments of organization and moments of chaos in my life. And I feel like a lot of the time, obviously, like, I joke a lot with my friends that, like, I'm a juxtaposition of a person, because I have the ability to be incredibly organized and, you know, diligent and hardworking. But I also, when I go off the rails, I never do anything subtly. I'm very extreme as a person. And so I think it's less about actually being organized or not being organized, or being stressed or not being stressed. It's the level at which I'm doing it. And I think that is why so many people... I keep hitting the microphone. I'm really just abusing our equipment today. I abuse you so you can be creative. Make me something.
This is Emily being creative.
I mean, in my opinion, I think madness is not necessarily madness. It's normal things at an extreme. Like, anxiety is not something new. Anxiety is something that everyone feels, but when you have an anxiety disorder, it's an extreme.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe the question is not so much the link between madness and creativity, but between extremes and creativity. Because you have the extreme organization, the extreme planning, the extreme control, which allows you to be creative. And I have the extreme chaos and the extreme scheduling that allows me to channel those emotions into whatever art it is I'm making.
Yeah.
And I actually have, so you saw Pillow Man, right?
I did.
So me and Miriam both went to see this play called The Pillow Man. You may have heard of it. I would recommend looking it up. But a big plot point of that play was that this child's parents tortured him because he was a story writer. And then he ended up making these amazing stories because he was tortured, and all of these dark things in his mind were brought to life. And so that's what made him creative. And I was just thinking about it when I was hitting the microphone. When I was abusing our
She was
set
sitting
equipment.
on the microphone.
Oh yeah, you've got a good spit barrier. I really appreciate the sound you capture. I'm very sorry to anyone who feels slightly violated by this. But that's, you know, like, that play must have been founded on something.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, what do you think in terms of, obviously, we're not telling you to abuse your children to make them creative. That's a terrible idea. We're not responsible for that.
Emily's not responsible to begin with.
Okay.
No,
Yeah.
I'm joking. This is an abusive.
Miriam's verbally abusing me. I'm feeling rather creative today.
Oh, it sounds like we're making fun of people who were abused. We're not.
No.
We're sorry.
No.
Cancel.
Decline.
Disregard.
No, we're not making fun of people who are abused. We are making fun of societies. Because we were talking about this earlier. It's really strange in the sense of society almost punishes, like, the idea of something is basic, something is like, ugh.
Unoriginal.
Yeah, the idea that, in my opinion, creativity is not always the most original thing.
But nothing is. If you think about it, even if you think your idea is original, it probably has been done at some point in time that you don't know about.
Or it's just a remix of
Yeah.
things that you've seen around you that
Yeah.
were other people's ideas.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, our imagination is based of things that we see around us. Therefore, things will overlap between different humans.
And I think there's also something to be said, just to quickly clear up this PSA, we were making fun of the idea that society almost seems to shame people for, like, and it almost seems to glorify and almost romanticize abuse, and that is not something that we agree with. Obviously, abuse is terrible and people deserve, help for the trauma that they've been through, but we don't think it's fair for society to glorify something that genuinely hurts people on a daily basis.
Yeah. And it's
so
also
much media does.
It's also the stereotype, you see the tortured artist or the mad genius. It's about having a heightened sense of one side of their personality.
Yeah. And so our aim with this podcast was actually really to sort of discuss that and sort of, point out that it's really not something that as a society we should romanticize. We should accept the points about ourselves. And I don't think you have to be any kind of abused to be creative. I think personally it's about that idea of extreme and that idea of passion.
Yeah.
And I think it's less about the form that it's taken. Abuse is one form that it takes, but it can also take any kind of form, personality. A lot of people with like autism or ADHD have said that really helps them with creativity because they attack problems from a completely different angle than most neurotypical people do. And so that is what we were trying to get at with that.
Yeah.
What were we talking about before? The Pillow Man?
Yes, that. Also, just a side note.
Oh.
If you want some real music, check out the rapper NF. This is hashtag not spons.
Not spots.
Not
Miriam is just a fangirl.
honestly. But yeah, I think his music definitely represents what it means to use art as therapy. So, yeah, definitely check it out. Back to the Pillow Man.
Shameless plug. No, I personally think that in terms of creativity, everything is like said, oh, it has to be original. That's not very original. That's basic. When really, some of the most successful things that we have ever seen have been something that's already been done from a completely different perspective. I think creativity and perspective go hand in hand so much.
Agreed.
Because I think perspective is what makes an audience engaged. Because have you ever been watching a TV show and your favourite character had like the worst personality, but because they looked like you or because they liked something you were interested in, that sort of is why you like them, the idea of familiarity.
Yeah.
I think people like it when they can see themselves in something or through something. And like, I don't know, using one example of like Hamilton.
Yeah.
Hamilton was not original because it was about a guy that already existed. Like, Lin-Manuel Miranda didn't make him up. It wasn't his own story, but it was an old story told from a completely new perspective. And that shift in perspective and the idea of something that was so old still having relevance today, but in a completely new context, is what made it so creative.
Yeah.
So, Miriam. See, I feel like this is what I have to do. I have to warn you with like a Miriam. What is the importance of context to art and creativity? Because I know a lot of the time people say things are only offensive when they're not in the correct context. Would you say that like context and perspective, what role does that play in creativity for you?
Do you mean the context of the artist or the context of the actual art?
Oh, I'm going to go with both, whichever one you want to do first.
Whatever you say. So I think the context to the art, I mean, it depends on the art, but I don't think it's always necessary. And I think you should just admire art for what it is and not necessarily need the context, because I think there's a beauty in that in itself. Context about the artist and what perhaps made them do this specific art piece or what made them write this song, I think, again, not that important, but could be useful in perspective. Like, what made them write it, what happened in their life that made them draw it, or, you know, it could give you an insight on what they were thinking while making it and what their process was. But I don't think context is necessary. I think we should just accept it for what it is, even if you don't necessarily agree with it. What do you think?
So if art came from a perspective that you didn't agree with, so you're very left-wing in your politics. If you had somebody coming from a very right-wing point of view who made a song, let's say, they made a song and it was a great song, it was a bop, as the kids say, and you were bopping to this song, and then in this song they said very degrading things about women, would that make you not like the song? Or would you say that the song is separate to the lyrics?
I mean, if I like a melody of the song but don't agree with the lyrics, I can still like the melody and disagree with the lyrics. And the lyrics would in turn make me think of that person in a different way. I can still appreciate it for what it is without necessarily agreeing with it, but it would just change my view of the person and what they stand for.
So would you say that
like, you can still admit, yes, they made a nice sounding song, but the lyrics was not acceptable.
Okay. Now, I understand that point of view. So in terms of madness, would you say that... What would you say is so appealing about, you know, art that is made by quote-unquote mad people?
I think it's the fact that you don't know what's going through their head, or you think that they're so vastly different from who we are, when actually they're not. They're just on one end of the spectrum, and it's that thing, especially we were talking about this with the serial killers, where you don't know, one, what they're thinking, two, what they're capable of, and three, what made them who they are and how it affects them in ways we don't see.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, that's so strange. So in terms of, like, us as people, you're coming at it from very much a... You enjoy what you don't know about it.
Yeah.
Or you enjoy the observation, almost.
Yeah.
You enjoy the observation of something that is different to you, which is why you said with the song that you wouldn't completely dismiss it, because you enjoy observing a different perspective.
Yeah.
See, I would say I'm different in the sense of, I agree that not everyone has to agree with my opinions for me to be able to admit that they're talented.
Yeah.
But from liking quote-unquote mad art perspective, I think I tend to like mad art because it gives me extreme feelings. So when I listen to something that is, you know, not necessarily a good TV show or a good song, but it's from my childhood, I'll still like it because it makes me feel nostalgic. And it's the same with quote-unquote mad art. I keep saying quote-unquote, and I'm going to...
We get it, Emily.
We get it. These are your words. Me attempting to, like, not sound mad myself. Just like, oh, she's repeated the phrase quote-unquote about 70 times. Could that... No. I promise. I'm sane. That's a lie. That's a complete lie. I'm marginally sane. I'm a bit sane. Anyway, not the point. The point I'm...
Or is it?
Or is that actually the whole point of this channel? Click subscribe to find out. Love how this is us plugging other things. No, I would say because madness is linked to such extreme feelings, I enjoy the feelings similar to you in a sense of they're not necessarily something I experience on a daily basis, but when somebody can give me their feelings through art. And so when I, as a person who's never experienced this feeling, feel it because somebody else has channeled it through this art form, I think a message I've always agreed with is the medium is the message. And so I
Agreed.
think the way that someone chooses to convey a story or an emotion makes me feel it that much deeper. And I think the emotion that they pack into this form of art, because I now have this feeling and this, it's almost the idea of empathy all over again. It's the idea of human connection. We
Yeah.
are all sharing these feelings, and I feel this because this person has made me feel it. And so I think you do have to be a little bit mad in order to have those extreme emotions that you can give to somebody else.
Yeah.
Because if they were very subtle emotions, the person listening or watching might not feel
them. It's about evoking what you feel and channeling it into other people. And I feel like with the mad sort of people, I feel they have such a high threshold of emotions.
Yeah, the depth of emotion.
Yeah. That they are able to do that because of past experiences, whatever they may be, that has made them mad. Yeah.
So maybe the idea is creativity isn't madness. Creativity is emotion, empathy,
Yeah.
extremes.
It's having that emotional threshold. I guess. It's about being able to feel, to express feeling, to use that feeling to benefit yourself by using the art form and to evoke the feeling in others.
So, is it bad then to not be creative?
I think everybody is creative in their own way. I don't think there's a single person on earth that doesn't possess even an ounce of creativity. I just think that our stories are just different, and therefore our forms of creativity will always be slightly different, and there's no real answer to is there such thing as bad creativity or, not being creative?
Yeah, I would say that's probably the beautiful thing about creativity is that it's that sharing of knowledge. So then, would you say that there is circumstance where creativity is not successful, it's not good?
It's about the intention behind the creativity. If you're being creative for the sole purpose of selfish reasons, I guess, where you're producing music or you're doing art to, one, I don't know, be famous or gain status, or not for...
But then is that a bad thing?
I think in small quantities, or in realistic quantities where you're doing it you're doing it to make money, because artists,
Pay your local artists. Give us your money.
but also there has to be some sort of personal intention where it's not just for the fame, or not just for the status, or not just...
But then isn't that what gives them that fulfillment? The idea of they have reached so many people.
I think not for everyone, because some artists create art for themselves, or some use art as a therapy that's not necessarily supposed to reach others, and that's the beautiful thing about art. But some people do it for the entertainment of others, and that's also okay.
Your art is valid.
Your art is also valid. So yeah, I think it's behind the intention, and yeah, pretty much sums it up.
Fair enough. Okay, linking back to another thing that has been reoccurring a lot in my life is people being insecure about the fact that they're not creative. Obviously, we covered that we believe that everyone is somewhat creative, but some people just think, you know what, I just have so much more of a brain for, maths and planning and more logical reasonings. I'm not naturally a very creative person, and they feel quite insecure and like that's undervalued. Do we think that there is value in a lack of creativity?
Yeah, because not everyone is going to be an artist. We need mathematicians, we need scientists. And if you feel like you fit that role, go ahead, We're I think it's such a judgmental thing to be like you're not creative, where like it's not a first of all, creativity is not something one person could judge. Second of all, who cares? Like, just do you. Like, if you like maths and you want to be a mathematician and you don't think you're creative, fair enough. Um, we need you too. And it's about not undervaluing people's talents, whether they are in the creative industry or not.
Yeah, I would say that creativity as an art form is very indirect, not necessarily in whatever message it's portraying, but in the method it uses to get there. Like creative processes take weeks and months and sometimes even like years and decades. I think that there's some value in the direct route, in sort of, the no BS option, the idea of point A, point B, point C, whereas I feel like creativity is more of a cloud,
Yeah.
whereas logic is more of a line. And I think that I know so many people who are insecure because they're not naturally very creative people, but I think that somewhat makes it better because I think logic and planning, you can still work in a creative field. So, me and Miriam, for anyone who isn't aware, are both actors and writers. And I think if we're in a writer's room or an actor's rehearsal, it's almost worth it to have someone there who isn't creative, who can cut through with that line of, in terms of logic, that isn't going to work. In terms of logic, this is what we need to bear in mind. And to sort of have that, the next logical stage in the story would be this character's death. Because this character is no longer needed and we need some emotional tension.
And it's also good to understand and realize that your audience isn't just going to be people in the creative industry. It's going to be, your nurse, your doctor, your driving instructor. Like, these people may never have met anyone in the creative industry, so you kind of need to see it from their perspective as well. Going back to perspective, art is subjective, and it's about perspective.
So non-creative people, would you say, act as a bridge between the creative soul and the audience? Because I have definitely seen multiple plays that have made no sense, and it's been so internalized in the artist's head, and like the artist had, I can't speak today, the artiste has made something that is so creative, but is so involved in, like, almost self-absorbed. In my opinion, a lot of overly creative work can be very self-absorbed because it wasn't made to reach an audience despite the fact that they knew that it was going to be put in front of somebody. And so I think having somebody who is not creative there almost acts as no, the actual idea that we have is to translate this message to the audience.
Yeah.
So we need to work on that translation of your creativity, because I think a lot of the downfalls of creative people is it's too self-absorbed. It's too their own head and there's no explanation.
Yeah, and it's sort of the thing what other creative people in the creative industry would understand, but normal people with other jobs would not. And it sort of doesn't make it accessible to everyone.
Yes, creativity needs to be accessible.
Yeah. Final question, Emily.
Oh, I'm getting the questions now, am I?
Yes.
The roles are reversed.
If you were a form of art, what would you be? Would you be a song? Would you be a painting, a sketch? Would you be... what other form is there? A play? Would you be a monologue?
Oh no. I feel like in terms of actual speech, I'm a very monologue person because I get lost in my trains of thoughts a lot. But I would say in terms of art form, I'm probably not something visual because I
Okay.
feel like so much of my communication style and the way I get my message across is very linguistics based. I would
Yes,
say I'm something
I
auditory.
agree. Emily is very, what do you say?
An arse.
It is an arse.
Emily just is.
Arse.
Makes it sound like I'm thick. I'm thick af. No, Emily just is a terrible person. Miriam, this is the bit where you say, no, Emily, you're not. No, Lexi, you're wonderful.
Oh, fine, you're wonderful. But, yeah.
I would say I maybe a poem. I
I agree. You
I
would
don't
be a
read-
poem.
I don't
because
read or write a lot of poetry.
You are a very poetic person, and the way you speak is very eloquent and graceful. So I feel like a poem is you.
I feel like it's also the idea of a train. Like when it comes to like traditional forms of linguistics, like monologues or books, you read them and there's a very strong sense of structure and the idea of everything is placed there for a reason. Whereas in poems, it's a lot more flowing, and it's like this was the original point, but now we're just going to go over here and we're going to explore this side tangent, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do this. So there's still purpose in it. I would say I very much care about the purpose of my message, but I think I'm very okay with the idea of it can flow off and there can be multiple messages within the one I'm trying to convey. Whereas you're very much this is my message, this is the thing that I'm going to get across to you. What form of art do you think you'd be, Miriam?
I would be a passage from a love letter. No, I would be a love letter.
Oh, because you're so loving.
Yeah, and I love romance.
Aww. Miriam, you can't wink. This is a podcast. They can't see you. Miriam just winked at the microphone. Miriam would be a love letter because she loves everything.
Not including Emily.
I laugh, but that hurt my feelings. I'm gonna go write a poem about it.
And that concludes the second episode of the Amara podcast. If you enjoyed that, please stay tuned for more episodes and we'll see you next time.
Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe.